Well, hey, y'all, I'm here. I'm relatively okay. Life and the struggle for a better one for all of us goes on, and I have a little story to tell you. There was this country that had a political leader that they hated. I mean, they hated him. He was an embarrassing bore who drank too much, seemed to be unable to walk and talk at the same time, or do either one very well independently either. But more importantly, to the people, he supported policies that made life much, much harder for them. Realizing that his virulent unpopularity greatly reduced his chances of winning the upcoming election for president, the embattled leader begged for help from his backers in another country, who came to the rescue and made sure he was elected, even though the people really did despise the man. The people were genuinely confused about how this man ever won the election because, they hated him so much, but he did. However, all the outside help in the world couldn't save the hated leader from himself, and his presidency has gone down in history as the most corrupt and ignominious of all the presidents of that country. Now, if you think I'm talking about the U.S. and Donald Trump, think again. I'm talking about Russia and Boris Yeltsin. And this isn't a little story I made up either. It is actually the truth about how the U.S. helped the most hated president of post-Soviet Russia win a re-election campaign that he was not going to win because, like I said, the people really did hate that man. And why, you wonder, did Russians hate Boris Yeltsin so much? Well, after Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev didn't handle the restructuring of the Soviet Union very well and introduced unpopular market-friendly policies to appease Washington and the West, Boris Yeltsin began maneuvering in the background of Communist Party politics around 1985 to position himself to challenge a weakened Gorbachev for power. It took him about 6 years, but Yeltsin seized upon the fortuitous efforts of Lithuania declaring their independence from the Soviet bloc to grandstand against Gorbachev publicly, which gave him enough political clout in 1991 to persuade a majority of deputies in the Russian parliament to amend the constitution and establish an executive presidency for Russia to be chosen by direct national ballot, which Yeltsin won by a landslide, becoming the first elected president of post-Soviet Russia. In response, there was a dramatic kidnapping of Gorbachev in Crimea by the former Soviet hardliners and a military junta that they sent to Moscow to return the country to central rule that ultimately failed when the officers of the military units in Moscow threw their support behind Yeltsin. So Yeltsin then suspended the Russian Communist Party and implemented even more shock doctrine style economic reforms. He ended price subsidies to spur the economy toward the market and told Parliament that was already wary of the reforms that he was implementing that went further than Gorbachev's. Yeltsin told them everyone will find life harder for approximately 6 months, then prices will fall. But that is not what happened. Instead, inflation in Russia rose in 1992 by 2,000%. The savings of millions of Russians were wiped out. People were forced to eat less because of the high prices of food. The catastrophe of Yeltsin's market reforms went on for 2 years. And it was so bad that the same parliament that changed the Constitution at his request to allow him to be elected now refused to obey him when he demanded that they change the Constitution again to dissolve Parliament that was now criticizing him. Undeterred and obstinate, Yeltsin ordered the dissolution of Parliament anyway, fired his vice president, neither of which he had any constitutional authority to do, and in response, many of the parliamentarians barricaded themselves in the White House, Russia's parliamentary building, rather than be forcibly removed by his unconstitutional dissolution. So Yeltsin turned his army loose on Parliament, which shelled the building all day on October 4, 1993. And this pretty much did Yeltsin in with the people of Russia, who were literally already going hungry because they couldn't afford enough food to eat under the market-friendly reforms he ramped up to appease you-know-who, Washington. He was not going to be reelected in 1996, so he called his friend, U.S. President Bill Clinton, to help. And yes, Bill, first Black President Clinton, sent a whole team to Russia to manage the failing re-election campaign of Boris "Everybody in Russia Hated Him" Yeltsin. Oh, don't believe me? Google Time magazine cover July 15, 1996. You're welcome. Why did Clinton do that, you ask? Because the U.S. would rather have Yeltsin in office to expand capitalism in Russia than have his challenger, very popular Communist Party member Gennady Zyuganov, become president and close Russia off. But despite being reelected by U.S. election interference, Boris Yeltsin was ultimately forced to resign because, he was still terrible and the people still hated him. And who did he name as his successor? Then Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, who was very popular as a prime minister. Putin served out Yeltsin's term and remained president for 8 years until 2008, when Dmitry Medvedev ran against him and won that next election. But Putin won re-election in 2012 and has been president in Russia ever since. Now, if the U.S. had left the disastrous Yeltsin re-election campaign to rot on the vine as it was clearly doing and let the people of Russia choose who they wanted to lead them back in 1996, perhaps we would not be talking about war in Ukraine today. Or maybe we would. Who's to say? But what I can say is that when we anti-imperialists talk about ending U.S. imperialism, we do mean ending it everywhere it shows up, even in Russia, where the U.S. exerted its soft power to influence the re-election of a leader the people in Russia never would have voted for again. And I will also say that now that you know this history, I don't want to hear any more about Russia interfering in U.S. elections. Because if the best Putin could do to influence elections in the U.S. was to share some Facebook memes, as folks swear all up and down that that's what he did, then he is clearly an amateur compared to the United States. Follow Lukman Nation on patreon.com/LukmanNation for lots of great content.